Good morning, everybody. My name is Gillian Askew. I'm one of three co-founders and directors of Go for Growth. We are a social enterprise dedicated to supporting the marketplace in sustainable growth. And I'm your host for this morning for the next 30 minutes or so. And we're discussing the pathway to net zero carbon this morning for specifically for providers, but we will pull in some of the public sector procurement context as well. So we've got a few people signed up this morning, so I'll just give it a couple of minutes before we get started. And during that time, I'll just cover some agenda and housekeeping stuff. So we are on Zoom today, as usual, for a Go for Growth webinar. The session is being recorded today, and a copy of the recording and a copy of the slide deck will be sent out to all registered attendees. Please do feel free to introduce yourself on the chat if you would like today. You can do so, just say hi. Please don't feel you have to, but if you would like to, please go ahead. But also, if you want to ask any questions as we go throughout the session this morning, you can do so using the Q&A functionality or the chat. I'll keep an eye on both. If you could pop Q&A into the Q&A, that would be great. I have carved out some time for questions at the end, but please do feel free to ask anything as we go. What we're going to cover this morning, and it's a bit of a canter through some of this stuff, we're going to cover what climate emergency is. It can be a very polarizing topic, so this isn't a webinar that's designed to shift your thinking or convince you of anything, but we'll be looking at what climate emergency means in terms of definitions and some of the science that sits behind it. We'll think about what carbon net zero actually means as well, and we'll look then at scopes 1, 2, and 3 at what they are. We'll think about the challenges that we are facing in this journey towards net zero as providers. But then we'll also have a look at what the benefits are for local businesses and suppliers, especially those who are seeking to supply the public sector, but actually it will cover all providers. And then, as I say, we've got some time for questions at the end. So if we are okay, we've got lots of people joined, so we'll kick on. So what is climate emergency? We're going to have a look at what the definition is, excuse me, what causes climate change and what the impact of climate change is. So the definition of climate emergency refers to this urgent need to address the rapid changes in global weather patterns and rising temperatures. So that includes the increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events such as heat waves, droughts, floods, storms, etc. What causes them? In essence, they are driven by human activity, especially things like burning fossil fuels, the deforestation activities, industrial processes, and all of those things that increase effectively the greenhouse gases, the GHGs, that are in the planetary atmosphere. And there are different types of greenhouse gases, but we typically think about carbon dioxide, CO2, and we think about that carbon footprint that we have as both individuals, our families, but also as businesses. And carbon dioxide is released mainly from burning fossil fuels. There is also methane and nitrous oxide there, as well as greenhouse gases. In terms of the impact of climate change, there are a number of impacts actually. So we can probably touch, feel and see some of the environmental consequences, rising sea levels, biodiversity loss. We can see degradation of ecosystems, increased pollution, those kinds of things. But there are also social impacts, so health risks that come from poor air quality. We have seen one recorded death that was attributed to poor air quality, heat-related illnesses and extreme cold-related vulnerabilities and impacts on those vulnerable communities as we see those extremes in weather. And there are also economic impacts that we face in our local economic communities. So increased costs from extreme weather damage, both the reaction to, but then also the prevention of future events. So insurance premiums, the rising insurance costs, and then disruptions to supply chain. We've seen climate stop supply chains for periods of time. So that's the definition of climate emergency, an overview of the causes and an insight into some of the impacts that we might feel from what climate emergency is. And I guess, we will all have probably seen some of these things. They might have affected our businesses, they might have affected our personal lives. So, we have seen droughts and floods. We have seen the local infrastructures being damaged, coastal erosion. We can see and touch and feel those things. And we can see the intensity of those extreme weather events and the impacts that they have on our societies around us. And so if we think about climate emergency and who's declared it, moreover, so more than 300 local authorities have declared climate emergency, including 91% of London boroughs. The National Health Service as a whole actually has recognised that climate emergency is a health emergency and is actively working towards becoming the world's first net zero health service. Universities UK reports that all UK universities have signed up to commitments to tackle climate emergency. And if you are a provider to UK higher education, you might have been invited to join a Scope 3 programme through those UK higher education institutions. But in addition, the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, APCC, in collaboration with the National Police Chiefs Council and Blue Light Commercial Organisation, a public sector buying organisation that is funded by the Home Office, they launched collaboratively a policing decarbonisation programme in November 2021. And Go for Growth is working in partnership with Net Positive Futures. We have a Scope 3 carbon reduction programme that is live for the wider public sector to join. And so a number of local authorities, in addition to higher education, have joined that programme, including Barnsley Council. So you might well have had an invitation through one of 32 universities, but also Barnsley Council as a local authority to join that programme. It is by invitation through the Public Sector Contracting Authority. But the point is, in the public sector, climate change, climate emergency, decarbonisation, carbon net zero, all of that terminology, it's a really high profile agenda in the public sector. Currently, and I'll talk about the legislation in a second, currently there is legislation set that means that certain organisations, when they're in certain contracts, will need to have a carbon reduction plan in their toolkit. But what is carbon net zero? So, put simply, carbon net zero or net zero means cutting carbon emissions to a small amount of residual emissions that can be absorbed and durably stored by nature or other carbon dioxide removal measures, leaving zero in the atmosphere. And our UK government has set a target of 2050 to achieve carbon net zero. And why do we need to do this? And regardless of our personal opinion, what we're looking at today is what some of the science tells us. And the science is showing that in order to avert the worst impacts of climate change, preserve, therefore, a livable planet, global temperature increase needs to be limited to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. So currently, the Earth is already about 1.1 degrees warmer than it was in the late 1800s, and emissions are continuing to rise. And to keep to global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade, as called for in the Paris Agreements, emissions need to be reduced by 45% by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050. And transitioning to net zero, and these are my words, so this is, I guess, a personal opinion. Transitioning to net zero it feels like one of the greatest challenges that humankind has ever faced. and probably calls for nothing less than complete transformation of how we produce, but also how we consume and how we move about on our planet. And therefore, the Go for Growth viewpoint is it will take not only every business, but every individual to make some contribution in order to get there. One of the challenges, and we'll talk about the challenges in more detail, but one of the challenges is that the UK target of 2050 for net zero, every public sector organisation is likely, and certainly those that have declared climate emergency, they will have a net zero target. What we're seeing in the public sector is, whilst the UK government target is 2050, actually lots of organisations have got more aggressive targets than that. Net zero by 2030, net negative by 2040, or net zero by 2040, net negative by 2045. We are seeing a build on that target. We are seeing much more ambitious aspirations from public sector organisations. That's challenging for the marketplace in that, as businesses, we need to work out what we are going to do as businesses, what our proportionate and relevant contribution will be to our pathway to net zero. And so we are charged with setting our own targets of when we will achieve net zero. And of course, if you're working with multiple organisations who have very different targets for net zero, that can be challenging in terms of how you set your own targets. I guess our advice would be do what feels right, relevant, and proportionate to your business. And that will be determined by who your clients are, what your clients are asking for, what the split of business is, all of those very normal things. There is something called PPN 0621. So published June 2021, came into force September 2021. Effectively, what it says is that, and there's a lot more detail that sits behind it, but where there is a contract value of £5 million per annum or above, excluding VAT, then those bidding organisations and those delivering organisations must have a carbon reduction plan, and you would likely be asked for it at point of bid. That said, whilst the legislation sits at 5 million or above, we are seeing lots and lots of procurement competitions, regardless of value, where one of the requirements, and it might not always be scored or weighted, but one of the requirements is to either be able to produce a carbon reduction plan as part of the bid, or to be able to produce one on request if you are successful at winning that bid. And so the message really, I think, coming loud and clear from the public sector is carbon is a really important agenda, and having a carbon reduction plan in your toolkit is becoming more and more important. I don't know that I would be quite so bold as to say it's bid winning at this point, but the direction of travel is it certainly could become so, with higher weightings on scored questions around carbon reduction, the broader sustainability and environmental agenda, and therefore having a carbon reduction plan could be a useful tool to have in your toolkit. So what are these? There are actually 4 scopes, but predominantly we talk about scopes 1, 2, and 3. We'll talk through what they are. So scope 1 are direct emissions. So these emissions come from sources that the company directly owns or is in direct control of. So, for example, your company-owned vehicles, your on-site fuel combustion, things like gas boilers, for example, and your industrial processes. So they're often referred to as operational emissions, since they're produced by activities that are under the company's direct control. Scope 2 are indirect emissions from energy. So emissions from the generation of purchased electricity, heat, steam, cooling, etc., consumed by a company. So this will often, for UK businesses, include electricity used in buildings and facilities. So although the energy is consumed on site, the emissions are generated elsewhere, typically by the energy provider. You will almost certainly in a carbon reduction plan be asked to calculate your scopes 1 and 2 as a minimum. Because they are your emissions from energy and emissions that are in your direct control. Scope 3 are indirect emissions in the value chain. And there are lots of different types of emissions in Scope 3. Go for Growth tends to talk about Scope 3 through purchased goods and services. So you can see that Scope 3, there are emissions that are not covered by Scopes 1 and 2 occurring across the entire value chain. So things like purchased goods and services, but also waste disposal, business travel, and also downstream activities. So those emissions that are generated by product use by customers. Typically, Scope 3 can make up the largest portion of emissions. So sometimes it can be up to 80, 90%, because it includes those factors that are outside of direct operations. And that makes Scope 3 crucial, but also challenging to measure and manage, because you are looking at, even if you just look at purchase goods and services, that is a volume market to approach. When you're calculating your carbon footprint, if you have calculated your Scope 3, brilliant, but actually Scopes 1 and 2 are what you'll be asked about as providers to the public sector as a minimum. If you can then think about how you can look at your Scope 3 emissions, especially in purchased goods and services, things like waste and business travel, then so much the better. You will have a lot more detail. And of course, a lot of the volume of emissions are in that Scope 3. I said there were 4 scopes. There is Scope 4. I'm not covering it today, but there is avoided emissions. So it's not usually used in any form of calculation. And it's not hugely widely talked about in the UK at the minute, but I imagine over time, Scope 4 will become more prominent. So what are some of the challenges that we face? I already talked about the challenge that we have in terms of those varying targets that the public sector has versus the UK government's target of net zero by 2050. Those are things that we as providers need to navigate and find our way through in terms of setting our own aspirations of when we think we can, tangibly achieve net zero. But there are other challenges in the public sector. So a lot of the tools that are out there use a spend-based data calculation rather than primary data, or at best, a combination of the two. And what that can mean often for suppliers are that if you're growing with a public sector client, so if your spend is increasing, therefore your carbon calculation, your carbon footprint would increase in line proportionately with your spend. And actually what we see is it's a bit more like that. So your spend can go up and your carbon footprint can come down because of the activities that you're taking. And so that primary data is super important. So if you are looking at tools to calculate your carbon footprint, if clients are inviting you into programs to look at, because they're looking at their Scope 3 purchase goods and services, you might be well versed to ask what data is being used to calculate the carbon footprint. Is it spend data? Or is it primary data, or is it a combination of the two? Where you really want to be to get accurate reporting is using primary data only. And actually, for argument's sake, the programme that Go for Growth uses with our clients on Scope 3 uses primary data only. And that gives us a real ability to be able to see the actions that businesses are taking and the impact that those actions and activities are having on the carbon footprint, regardless of how much you might be growing with a client. Lots of businesses, and we see this especially in small to medium enterprises, micro organisations, lots of organisations have yet to calculate their carbon footprint. And it's a real imperative, actually, if you're going to reduce anything, you need to know where your starting point is. So that baseline is really important. When providers come into the Go for Growth programme as an invitation through our clients, the program allows you to calculate your scopes 1 and 2. And I would expect to see that in any program that you're going into, that there is the ability to calculate your carbon footprint as a minimum at your scopes 1 and 2. And that should not be an overly complicated calculation. You should be looking at your energy usage, your fleet, for example. So it shouldn't be out with your ability to calculate. You will need to have some data around what your fleet is doing, how many miles you're doing, etc. And you will need to have some energy usage data, either in kilowatt hours or in tons. But you would normally in your estate have that kind of information that you can get to be able to calculate your scopes 1 and 2. There's lots of information out there in the marketplace, but actually not an awful lot of clarity. There are tons of tools out there to calculate your carbon footprint, but again, as I've said, there's not a huge amount of clarity on how they work. And sadly, you could use 3 different tools and get 3 different answers. And that's, again, one of the reasons why primary data is so important, because the data drives the answer, and therefore there should be consistency in those things. One of the other challenges, however, is a lot of those programs are based on selling offsets. Now, offsets definitely have a place. I am certainly not saying that neither I or my organisation that I represent are anti-offsets. However, it certainly is not the first thing that we would do as organisations when we are seeking to reduce our carbon footprint. So it's perhaps the last thing that we would do in order to achieve net zero, but we will have taken all our other tangible actions first, where we have control over our scopes 1, 2, and our scope 3. We will do all of those things first before we get to offsets. So beware, caveat emptor applies, buyer beware, when you are looking at going into those programs. And I would like to think that you shouldn't have to pay, certainly you wouldn't have to pay if you were invited into a Go for Growth program by one of our clients. The client would fund it for you. So beware of those programs that get straight into selling offsets and have charges around these things. So you should be able to work through calculating your scopes 1 and 2 at least, and then work on your scope 3 without having to buy offsets. Certainly not straight away. But lots of organisations say to us, but where do we start with this? Smaller organisations especially. And this is our sister company, Net Positive Futures. This is one of their graphics actually that they have been using for a long time, and Go for Growth uses it as well. And Go for Growth works in partnership with Net Positive Futures on our Scope 3 programme. And there are 3 spheres. So we have the sphere of concern. So these are the things that we need to be aware of, but they lie beyond our direct ability to solve as individual organisations or through specific projects. So we acknowledge these larger scale issues. They're at macro level, if you like. Our primary focus should always be where we can make a difference. So we make sure we're aware of the concerns that we have, the broader macro higher level issues, but that's as far as we go. And then we have our sphere of influence. So these are areas where we as organisations can put some meaningful impact in place. So within a procurement process, for example, that would be factors such as the subject matter of the contract, the budget that's available, the opportunities that are available for the marketplace. And it's about asking ourselves as organisations, whether we're buyer or supplier, what can we influence through this particular project, through this particular contract, through this particular activity? And then finally, we have our sphere of control. So these are aspects that we can directly address and act upon now, today, tomorrow. And for every project, for every contract, it's essential that we evaluate the environmental, the social, the economic impacts and opportunities, and then choose for our organisation the most relevant and achievable steps. And we can't change everything, and we can't solve every challenge at once. But by taking intelligent and focused action within that sphere of control, we can create positive change. So this is the narrative that we build as an organization, understanding that bigger picture, recognizing our limitations, and then focusing our efforts where they matter most. These actions might be small and they might not always be economic, they might be environmental, they might even take years to fully materialize, but maintaining that focus is key to driving real impact over time. So when we work out of our sphere of control, those things that we can directly address, that's where we start as individuals, but also as businesses. We start in the area that we can control. And actually, one of the messages, and again, you can see this is our sister company Net Positive Futures graphic. It's not enough to simply do less harm. We need to help our teams, our individuals. We need to help our business to be able to do things differently. And this information will help you do two things. It'll help you tell the story of what you're doing, who you're helping. It'll help you target your engagement. And you'll be able to then see where you're adding value, understand your contribution, the economic, the environmental, and the social impacts that you are creating. So you're reducing those negatives and you're enhancing those positives to make an overall net positive contribution. And you can provide your own sense of supplier scrutiny and your own support on that journey to delivering net positive. But there has to be something in it for us, doesn't it? We need to think about why this is important to us as businesses, and we encourage our public sector clients to think about the benefits to suppliers and local businesses when they're inviting you and encouraging you and asking you to be a part of what we do for net zero. So cost savings are up there with one of the big benefits of transitioning to carbon net zero. So implementing energy efficient practices, reducing waste, for example, they can all lead to significant operational cost savings. I've got some examples. So an organisation called Crystal Doors, and this is on the Business Climate Hub website. They're a small manufacturing company in Rochdale. They achieved a 44% reduction in energy consumption by investing in renewable energy and energy efficient machinery. It can also enhance your market competitiveness. So consumers and clients are increasingly favouring environmentally responsible companies. So adopting sustainable practices can enhance your brand, your reputation. It can attract eco-conscious customers into your organisation. And again, the UK Business Climate Hub notes that businesses who are committed to net zero are better positioned to meet evolving market demands. So you can have a look at the Climate Hub for more information on that. It can also help manage regulatory compliance and also mitigate risks. So by proactively aligning your business with environmental regulations, it can reduce risk of non-compliance and any penalties that might go with that, but also prepare your business for future legislative changes. So the Environment Act 2021, for example, sets legally binding targets for air quality and waste reduction impacting various industries. So depending on the industry that you're in, you might already be required under regulation to do certain things for the environment. It can also give you access to funding and other investment opportunities. So investors are increasingly prioritising sustainability and green funding. Companies with clear net zero strategies might therefore find it easier to secure funding. The UK Net Zero Review highlights that climate transition could provide UK businesses with more than £1 trillion of funding by 2030. And if you go to chapter 0, you can see that in more detail. And then finally, that pathway, that transition to net zero can open up opportunities for sustained growth and innovation as well. So the shift towards net zero can lead to the development of new products and services, I have an example. So Cooper King Distillery became the first distillery in England to achieve net zero carbon emissions by implementing sustainable business practices and thereby attracting a whole new customer base. You can see that again on the Business Climate Hub. So there are just a few examples actually that hopefully demonstrate that the transition to net zero is not only beneficial to the environment and to our planet, but also it offers tangible economic, commercial, and growth advantages for businesses as well. So there is a real benefit to our sustainable growth as organisations for embracing carbon net zero. A final thing for me before I open up for questions is there is a decision we make, I guess, as businesses in terms of being the difference. Do we choose to be a part of making a difference, or do we choose to sit on the outside of that, the periphery of it? If you're looking to provide your goods and services to the public sector, you will know probably firsthand that how much power the public sector has to drive transformative change. It's in excess of £300 billion market. It buys everything. And despite public cuts, there is a very stable procurement market out there. Lots and lots of opportunities for lots of businesses and a real drive for that business to be directed to small to medium enterprises, voluntary sector organisations, and diverse suppliers. So being a part of that as a supplier to the public sector, you have the ability to shape the future. You can influence the journey to a greener, more sustainable economy. And that means you can protect what matters to your business. So your journey should be relevant and proportionate to you. But it gives you the ability to safeguard communities that you serve or that you reside within as a business, to preserve our precious ecosystems and resources through the actions that you take. So the decisions that you make and the actions that you take can help to protect those things that matter most. And it can also inspire collective action. So you can also, as businesses, encourage your supply chains and businesses that you collaborate with locally, that you work with, network with. If you're part of your local chambers, for example, or any networking organisation, you can inspire collective action through your own supply chain, but also through the businesses that you work with. And they can therefore follow your lead. And I guess there is an overarching message that says, if we act now, and if we work together on this, if we move as a cohesive force, then we actually can create a world for our future generations that is worth inheriting. And that feels, in and of itself, a really crucial and very important and worthy driver to all of this stuff. Hopefully that has been a useful insight into carbon net zero, some of the challenges that we face, but some of the benefits, some of the approaches that you might want to take, and the why of all of that. What I will do is open up for questions now. So I will stop sharing my screen for a second and just see if we have got anything in Q&A or chat. We haven't as yet, but that's okay. What I will say is, whilst anybody is thinking about whether they want to ask a question or not, Go for Growth is on hand to answer any questions outside of this, to chat to any organisations about carbon net zero, and to hopefully try and give some pointers. Go for Growth is here to support you on your growth journey in the public sector, whether that's answering quality questions in bids, applying for grants, whether that is thinking about your carbon net zero journey or the social impact that your organisation is taking. We are here to support the whole of you. I will pop in the email that comes out contact details of how to get in touch with Go for Growth, but our email address is support@Go for Growth, and that's go4growth.co.uk. I will pop it actually in the chat as well, just in case anybody does want to email us. But you can get in touch with us and have a chat with us, no problem. So let me just pop that in there for you. So that's our email address in there. I'll also put, we have an open bookable calendar where you can book a 30 minutes Teams catch up, and you can chat about anything with us that's to do with your growth as an organisation and how we can support you. So please do feel free to get in touch. We haven't got anything in the chat or the Q&A. So rather than hold us here, what I will say is thank you so much to so many of you for joining us today. I hope that it's been useful. We do just have a couple of things coming in. We don't have any dealings in South Africa. We are a predominantly UK based. We have done some work outside of that. So, but we have no closed doors in Go for Growth. So any organisation based anywhere of any size, and that includes overseas, can come and have a chat with Go for Growth, and we can work out how best we can support you. But thank you everybody for taking time out of your calendar today. If you do want to get in touch and have a chat, we would be more than happy to do so. So have a great rest of your Thursday, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you on another Go for Growth webinar sometime soon. Thank you ever so much. Bye for now.